I had won the Mid-South double by only a mere 20 seconds, and only 40 seconds separated the entire top three of us. This past weekend was the Mid-South Gravel event in Stillwater, Oklahoma. I've done this race 2 other times, but this is the first year I've decided to do the 50K run on day 1, plus the 100-mile gravel race on day 2. They call this crazy event the double. Here's how it went down. Let's talk weather for a second. The temperature leading up to the event was in the 80s. And the week after the event, the temperature was projected to be in the 70s. The Friday and Saturday of the actual event, the temps were in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Are you kidding me? And this leads me to our first life lesson in this video, which is to stay positive. I've learned over many years of bike racing that anytime you start to think negative things, your performance probably declines. So you always need to try and stay positive or find the positive even when things go south. This weekend, even if the temps did drop 50 degrees, I was going to try and find the positive. My positive going into the Mid-South was that I'm a cyclocross racer. I'm used to racing in the cold. In fact, I probably have an advantage over most of my competitors, having raced in the cold more often than them. So there we were, 8 a.m. on Friday morning, standing in freezing temperatures with snow on the ground and actually shedding clothes before the 50K run. I decided to race in shorts with a long sleeve base layer and a t-shirt over that with no gloves and normal socks. I know that I usually get pretty hot when I run, so I was pretty confident in this decision. This is probably due to 2 reasons. Number 1, running is at a lower speed, which means less cooling from the wind. Number 2, I am a far less efficient runner, which means my core body temperature was probably higher when I was running versus cycling. I'm pretty happy with the way that I paced this race, despite having only ran 21 miles as my longest run beforehand. For most of my miles, I was ticking off about 7:15 miles, and my overall pace for the entire race was 7:24. My heart rate for the majority of the time stayed between 165 and 175, which equates to about my tempo zone on the bike. For as long as I can remember, I've heard people talk about hitting a wall at mile 22 when doing a marathon, but no hitting of walls occurred for almost the entire duration of this event. I say almost because I made it to mile 30 before I really felt like I hit a wall and my pace dropped to 8:30s. If I had to theorize why most marathoners hit a wall at mile 22, I'd say it has something to do with nutrition and carb intake. Just a guess. I had several people ask me about my mental state during the run, meaning did I have positive or negative thoughts? And to be quite honest, I stayed pretty positive throughout the majority of the run. I found myself thinking about 3 things. First of all, I was thinking, am I going to hit a wall and not be able to finish or struggle to finish at some point? Number 2, am I going too fast? And so there's a part of me that's trying to hold back the excitement and run at a pace that I know is manageable over the course of 32 miles. And then the last thing was just making sure that my nutrition stayed really dialed because I knew that that was a crucial part of finishing strong. Talking about nutrition, I had the help of my little buddy, Nathan. He is a 12-ounce bottle that holds fluid, but also holds 2 gels. I decided to start with Nathan with 12 ounces of highly concentrated Flow Formulas lemon lime with caffeine with about 60 grams of carbs. My game plan was to sip on this throughout the first half and have it refilled for the second half, along with taking in 1 Honey Stinger gel every 5 miles because that's where there was a neutral station and I could grab a cup of water to chug down after the gel to help it digest. Okay, let's do some math here. 2 bottles with each about 60 grams of carbs plus 5 gels each at 25 grams of carbs. That puts us at right around 240 grams of carbs total. Divide that by 4 hours and you end up right about 60 grams per hour, which is exactly what the science says. Optimal carb intake is 60 to 90 grams per hour. Nicely done. I was really proud of the fact that not a single person had passed me and that I had actually been passing people throughout the entirety of the run, almost. Until about 1 mile to the finish, one person had passed me and I was hurting pretty bad, so I didn't even think about trying to hang with him. I guess this is what you would call a runner's kick. I guess I didn't have one. I got to the finish line in a time of 3 hours and 53 minutes. My first thought was that I had to have been one of the top double finishers and that most of the people who finished ahead of me were just doing the 50K run. Unfortunately, I was disappointed to find out that about 5 people were ahead of me in the double and that I had finished 7th overall in the run, which was quite a bit better than I had expected. However, to win the double, I was going to have to make up 15 minutes in the bike race the next day, so I found myself really nervous and really hoping that most of these people were runners who were doing the bike and that I was a biker that was doing the run. Turns out they were actually the best of both worlds. Triathletes. The rest of that day was pretty brutal. I could barely walk, and stairs were out of the question. I found myself trying to do all of the proper recovery things like stretching, I took a nap, I used the massage gun, but I think that the number one most important aspect of recovery between these two events is nutrition. I needed to be on top of nutrition because not only was I fueling my recovery from the run, but at the same time, I was already starting to fuel for my performance on the next day in the bike. So then was not the time to skimp on food at all. So just to give you an idea of what I ate that day, we stopped by Chipotle on the way home and I had a huge burrito with white rice and chicken and veggies and all the helpings. And then snacking throughout the day because when you do a big event like that, you find yourself hungry just about every hour. And then that night, I had a huge carb-loaded pasta dinner. Carbs, carbs, carbs! Now moving on to the bike race. The real feel that morning was 20 degrees, which brings me to my life lesson number 2 for this video, which is to plan for proper clothing. For the run, I had nailed this exactly. I knew exactly what to wear at 25 degrees because I had practiced wearing different articles of clothing throughout my training and had kept track of that throughout the season. If you want to get really nerdy, you could make an entire spreadsheet listing out all the different temperatures you run and ride in and the exact clothing that you find most comfortable for each of those temperatures. Boy, do I love spreadsheets. I had already looked at the temperatures for race day and knew exactly what I was going to wear on the start line that would be a good amount of clothing throughout the entirety of the race.
And then, as they have done many times before, as Batman and Robin, courageous warriors against crime.
However, I made a last-second awful decision to put on a big winter jacket and started the race with that jacket and ended up getting really sweaty within 30 minutes, and this jacket was so big that I couldn't put it in any of my pockets, so all I could do was unzip to cool myself off, which felt like a huge rookie mistake because I knew if Dylan saw my jacket flapping in the wind, he'd make fun of me for all of the aerodynamic watts that I was losing. So, number 1, stick to your game plan when it comes to clothing, and number 2, if you do wear a jacket, make sure it's small enough to be able to squeeze into one of those pockets. Chris Yu, the aerodynamic engineer at Specialized, and yes, that is a real job, says that when they tested it, an unzipped jersey over the course of 50 miles can cost up to 10 minutes. That's huge. Despite waking up that morning feeling as if I'd been hit by a bus and barely being able to walk to the car, when I got on the bike, things felt a little bit better. I don't know if this is because I've just been riding my bike for so long, or if maybe it's because of the muscles that were so fatigued from the run weren't so crucial for bike riding, so I was able to do a pretty decent job on the bike. This is the only legitimate time that I can actually say that when I finished the 100-mile race, I felt better than I did before the race. However, from very early on in the race, I could tell that my high end wasn't quite there and that hanging on to the front group of this race was going to be harder than expected. Much harder. In fact, you hear most cyclists talk about starting with a race with a certain amount of matches in their matchbox. Well, basically, I was starting the bike race with 0 matches in my matchbox because anytime the pace picked up, what I couldn't do was respond to those surges. I could grind it out all day, but I had no high-end power. The group was really big for the first 20 miles, and I made it pretty close to the front of the race before things started to get really intense. I quickly found myself dangling off of the front group of 50 or 60 riders right before we hit that really muddy section at mile 24. I had actually brought 2 different bikes to the Mid-South, not knowing exactly which one I was going to start on. My Trek Crockett that I raced all of the cyclocross season on was set up with more aero wheels and a power meter, but was a little bit heavier, and it was a 1x drive chain. On the other hand, I had my Niner BSB, which was a little bit lighter, had a 2x drive chain, but didn't have a power meter. After a 10-minute discussion with Dylan Johnson about drive chains and tires, he convinced me that the Niner BSB setup with the 2x was a better decision, so unfortunately I don't have any power files to assess for this race. However, I did have heart rate for the race, but it didn't pick up the first hour, but it did start right before that 24-mile section, and at that point my heart rate was already at 185, which is not at all manageable for the course of 100 miles, which is why I decided to let that front group ride away from me. As soon as I turned on to that crazy muddy section, there were already people off and walking in front of me, so I jumped off, took only 2 steps, and realized there's no way I'm walking this entire section. My legs did not want to take 2 steps, so I jumped back on the bike and rode the whole thing, passing people the entire time, which means it was definitely a good call to ride it. With my legs being so sore from the run the day before, I found myself in groups that matched my effort level, but did not at all match my skill level. And there were only a few technical sections along this 100-mile course, but anytime we hit any amount of technical sections, I would completely outride the group that I was with, only to be caught and passed by those same people, which was pretty frustrating, but I was just not able to ride at my normal level. For the last 4 hours of the race, my heart rate stayed right around 170 beats per minute and didn't go over 180 a single time. This is pretty unusual for me because usually I can ride at about 180 over the course of 100 miles and would even be able to respond to surges, putting my heart rate into the 190s for short bouts of time. Typically, lower overall heart rate numbers is a sign of fatigue, and this is most likely due to a higher perceived exertion, meaning you simply cannot push your body to those higher heart rate zones because of the effects of fatigue. As we got closer to the finish line, I knew in the back of my head that ultimately I was racing against the clock and not against the people around me. So anytime the pace would drop in the group I was in, I'd go to the front and try to pick up that pace. But sometimes this worked to my detriment because some of the other riders would get too excited and pick up the pace even more, and I'd find myself barely hanging on to the group as the pace got faster and faster. The last 15 miles were into a strong headwind and it was really bumpy terrain, but when we hit town, I got a final surge of adrenaline and picked up the pace all the way to the line, thinking it would really stink to lose the double by a few seconds. I do have to admit that I'm a little bummed out that I didn't get to participate more at the front of the race. I had at least hoped that I'd be a part of that final selection and would at least get to witness the attacks happen towards the end of the race. However, I didn't even get to the front of the race and make that selection and found myself riding in the second or third group throughout the whole day. Really, I would have liked to have seen how I would have stacked up against these top guys, especially since this is probably one of the only gravel events I'm going to do all year. And really, I just wanted to beat Dylan. I finished over 30 minutes behind the leaders in a time of 5:27, but as soon as I crossed the line, I had asked Bobby, did I win the double?
Double? I think so. I'm sorry, I didn't have champagne. Stay right here, don't fucking leave. I want to let go! But you have to check times. We have to check times. Stay right there. Right there.
So with a quick bout of number crunching, they had told me that if nobody crossed the line at the 5:47 mark, I had won the double. But 5:47 came and went and no announcement was made. So we were standing there waiting, and eventually they came and found me and said, "It's close, really close." And here's how it went down.
Come here, right here, right here. Our winner, 2022 double champion with a time of 9 hours, 22 minutes, 57 seconds is Andrew Dillman! Here comes Teresa Leslie!
I had won the Mid-South double by only a mere 20 seconds. And only 40 seconds separated the entire top three of us. So basically what happened was they beat me by a lot in the run, and I beat them by a lot, plus 20 seconds, in the bike. I look back at the race and think of all the different things I could have done differently that could have cost me 20 seconds and cost me the race. And I'd like to close this video with life lesson number 3, which is follow your heart. Yes, that is extremely cheesy advice, but I mean it. Only you know what's going to motivate you. For most people, running 50K and then riding your bike 100 miles in 2 days would not get them very jazzed. But for me, it's had me pumped for the last 3 months. I've been training more than I usually would during my base season, and I think that's going to help my overall fitness for the entire year. So basically what I'm saying is find what motivates you and do it. Goals are only effective at increasing training motivation if they are personally motivating for the individual setting them. That's all I've got for this video, so if you liked it, be sure to hit the thumbs up and the subscribe buttons. And if you find yourself looking for a coach, be sure to check out the Ignition Coach Co. website. And until next time, y'all stay rad.
Crazy doublers. Runners and cycling and